I'm Eric Johnson, and I'm meeting with Gary Klein again, and today we descend into the darkness. Would you care to tell us what we're going to talk about today?
Okay. First off, let's do a disclaimer. This is for educational, informational purposes only. If you are involved with borderline, antisocial, histrionic, or narcissistic personality person, and there's a potential for, a realistic potential for violence, this probably isn't for you. I would get a therapist who's very familiar with that, and or an attorney, because it can turn south very quickly.
So we're going to give you some overview of some things that may work when you're dealing with someone who, rather than being a real danger to you, is just a real pain in the neck.
Okay.
Agreed?
Agreed. All right. So there's a man I know, and he refers to his ex as the darkness.
Well, gee, that's not very nice.
Not very nice at all.
But is it accurate?
We're going to find that out. So what this man, I've heard him say this many times, is the way the darkness operates: rationalization, justification, minimization, half-truths, white lies, and gosh darn lies. And I changed that last part so we could maintain our G rating. So we'll go back to that in a minute. All right. Something that the cluster B personality types are really good at, it's like the movie The Alien. Remember The Alien? It wraps a tentacle around the victim's throat and then shoves another one down its stomach. And then when the good astronauts come and try to take the alien off, the alien tightens the grip around the throat of the victim, which is the friend of the astronaut. So they don't want to kill it, but if they just sit there and do nothing at all, it's going to get killed anyway. So what do? All right. So this man sent me an email one time, and what he said is, I remember one time when I was a kid, and we went to California on a family vacation, and this dead jellyfish washed up on the beach. This other kid grabbed a stick and started beating it repeatedly, and I looked at him and I said, it's already dead. And the kid said, well, I'm going to kill it worse. And then the man finished with, little did I know this would be foreshadowing of my life. All right, so for the reptiles, the cluster Bs, children have two functions, generally speaking. And the first one is the kid's job is to make the parent look good. And the second one is to worship the parent, but always from the bottom part of the totem pole. So the parents don't want any competition, just make me look good, and once you've done that, go away and don't bother me.
And glorify me by debasing yourself.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So when the kids grow up and start to gain independence, they have to be brought to heel, according to the reptiles' thought pattern. Either brought to heel. If that doesn't work, then they've got to be banished. All right. So I'm going to just give you a little, a couple of stories, brief stories about the darkness, and then you can call her the darkness, or don't have to call her anything. So what happened is, one of their kids, the couple had been divorced for many years now, and as one of the kids grew up, the kid, Junior, I'll call him, was getting in trouble at school and with the law. So that doesn't make the darkness look good. She upped the pressure. Junior pushes back and says, I'm not going to do anything you say. So the darkness dropped off Junior at Dad's house one day. Said, there, that's it, you raise him. Then the dad said, well, okay, I'd like you to pay child support then, because I've been paying you child support. And then her response, I won't read it, but I mean, it's huge. She just goes on and on. One of the things is, ask one of your friends who is a real parent if a couple of $100 a month is considered child support. And then it goes on. And then the darkness, she's really good at this. Junior has 3/18 more years at the most in your care. She always likes fractions. One time she told this guy, or wrote to him and said, you kept Junior more than your allotted time last week. You owe me a fifth of a day. So watch out for fractions. Let's see. Don't pretend that you've done more than you have. It's not becoming. Maybe you're that clueless, but I don't think so. Either way, step up and do it now or don't, but quit whining. So this is really smart. All he said was, hey, I've been paying you child support. You know, are you going to pay me? And then, boom, blows up. And then, so in response to that, this is what he wrote to me, and I'll shorten this up. In child support and from his business, etc., he's paid her over $350,000. So once again, rationalization.
Yeah, but that's just a mere $100 here and another $100
right,
there.
Right.
It's hardly anything for which we should be grateful.
A couple of $100 a month. Rationalization, justification, minimization, half-truths, white lies, and gosh darn lies. All right. And this is what he said. With the darkness, it's not about the money. It's about winning and me losing, and I haven't lost enough. She has no concept of how hard it's been over the years for me to make those payments and how much I'm struggling from day to day. My business is struggling. It's still a tough economy. I'm battling depression, anxiety, and insomnia. My boss is breathing down my neck, and I don't know how much longer I can keep it up. This kind of thing would make no sense to her. It's a game, and she can't win by enough, ever. Then I got a text from him one day, because she sends him texts and emails and he forwards them to me. And this one just said, if the darkness says something in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, is it still a lie? All right. So this is something that he told me about in retrospect. One of the children, just a little infant, he was holding the baby, and the darkness came over because the baby was crying, and she grabbed the arm and started pulling, saying, give me the baby. And he's saying, no, don't, you're hurting him. And she kept pulling, and now the baby's screaming because he's in pain. And so the father said, okay, great, take him. And in retrospect, he said he realized that she would hurt the kid in order to get her way. And then that was a theme that would play out. So it was a red flag that he realized was a red flag, but not until much later. Another time, the dad picked up the 3 kids. Again, they've been divorced for years now. And the eldest he took to a football game, and the other 2 he dropped off at his mother's, so the kid's grandmother's house. When the kid went to the football game, went back that night to the mother's house, to the darkness's house. Oh, Dad and I had so much fun. Well, she doesn't like that. So she sends a note and says, you're not to do that again. Well, next time there's a football game, he took the kid, dropped the 2 kids off at his mother's house. Then he got another note, and it said, you do that again, I will show up with the police and physically remove the children
From your mother's
from
house.
your mother's house. And so he said, oh, okay, he doesn't want to put the kids through that, but she doesn't care at all.
By the way, there's nothing illegal about dropping your kids off with your mothers while you take the older child or the child who happens to be interested in football to a game, but that won't stop. I mean, the point was to call the police, to embarrass, to frighten, to create suspicion. Well, the police were called.
Right.
You know, it takes both people to have something like that happen. All you had to do was do what your ex-wife said, and the police wouldn't have been called. So that way you have some blame to share. You're like, for somebody calling the police and wasting their time? Well, you knew what you could have done to prevent that. Like, well, yeah, but you're just stomping all over my rights to get there. I mean,
Right.
it's like, hey, it's a nice family you got there. It'd be a shame if something happened to it. You're like,
That was a good accent. I won't ask if you've ever done that for real.
no.
And so what this man did is he had to go back to court, apparently more than once, to have put in the divorce decree that he could do that. And he said it cost him about $10,000 to do that. Now, again, this is years after the divorce, and then this is what he did. The dad quit using the attorney after that, and he represented himself. I would not recommend that before or when you're getting divorced or right after. Okay, this was years later. And so,
By the same token, however, that we are not here to sell legal services. We're here to talk about your problems as a parent and the things that you encounter. And so, yeah, I mean, if you're in dire financial straits, or you just lose faith in the legal system, you're not going to hear me trying to defend it. There's a lot of bad divorce lawyers out there.
Okay. So what this man did is he represented himself, and then he would start requesting from the darkness's attorney documentation. So she would say, you owe me all this money, and it wasn't even an Excel spreadsheet, it was just a Word document. I spent this much on the kids,
Yeah.
and she would write back and say.
There's your documented proof of an
Right.
expense. It's like, that's, that's just hearsay in paper form.
Right, right. And every time he would make a request, it would cost her money. And so eventually, because it was actually her new husband who was paying for this. So the darkness, she's worth, I'm guessing, maybe about $1 million, and she's worked 1 year in her whole life. And actually, it wasn't a full year. Pretty good gig if you can get it.
Yes.
And you have no conscience. All right. And so eventually, the husband, apparently, the new husband apparently said, okay, we're not doing this anymore, because it wasn't costing this, the ex-husband anything other than his time.
Yeah. It's surprising that she had a new husband that was willing to stand up to her, though. That was his boon. Right?
Yeah, well, that was an interesting one, too. Another time, when the darkness was married to this man, they lived in a planned urban development, and she was the treasurer for the community. And she got a credit card, unbeknownst to her husband, and ran it up so high that she embezzled money at least twice to pay off the credit card, and then she paid the planned urban development account back, but she had embezzled money. Once the rest of the board members found that out, they said, well, we're going to prosecute her. And so this is that alien thing again. The board members, because the husband had a sister who was on the board, and she stood up and said, hang on a second, if you prosecute her, you're going to punish my brother. So that's, once again, you try to save the victim or try to do what's right, boom, you're killing your friend or harming your brother. All right, I could go on and on and on with these stories. All right. We're just going to talk about the strategy. So when I called this man, I said, if you were doing this video, what would you tell people? What advice would you give when the kids are involved? And one of the things he said is that the darkness didn't try to get the kids to hate their father, but she did everything she could to make it harder for him to have time with them. All right, so one of the things is...
So they became indifferent.
Yeah, to a degree they did.
Didn't need their hatred, just needed them to be cut off in some form.
In some form, right.
Okay.
Right. So one of the things, the first thing this man told me, he said that it actually took him years to get over being afraid of the darkness, because she was so clever and so devious and would go to any lengths to cause problems.
But he wasn't afraid that she was going to slit his throat. What kind of fear are we talking about here?
Well,
Because there's a lot of people at the beginning stages of their family breaking apart, and you're thinking, it's like, well, it's one thing to be afraid of having your kids kidnapped. It's one thing to be afraid of having your throat slit in your sleep, poisoned. He wasn't afraid of violence. He wasn't afraid of that. What was he afraid of?
What happens with a lot of these folks, the mammals, who take this kind of abuse, they end up with a form of post-traumatic stress disorder, right? It's going back to that tsunami effect again. It just adds up. So no matter what you do, you may or may not get clobbered. When that happens, the primitive regions of our brain, they're on high alert all the time. You get stress hormones cranking through your body, does major damage. This is not some silly little thing. It's very real and it's very documented. Getting the police called on him, having his parents called, telling stories around in the neighborhood, having his things stolen. She had a yard sale and one time, and the kid said, Dad, that's all, or Mom, that's all Dad's fishing gear. You know, why are you selling that? And so he's always constantly looking around. So even though it's not a machete, the primitive regions of the brain cranks out the stress hormones because you never know when you're going to get clobbered. Then you take that and put it over a year or 10 years or 15 years, and you've got someone who will be afraid enough over a long period of time to heal and get back to, okay, I don't have to be afraid anymore. Let's see. This is what he said helped him. First off, he realized, he said, oh, her behavior is predictable. So that was a shift from, oh my gosh, you won't believe what she did this time, to, oh, yeah, she's got some serious issues. Hey, this is what she did. So he stopped freaking out. He stopped letting the primitive region take over into the fight, flight, or freeze mode. He said that after a while, you pay attention, then you know what to expect, and so you shouldn't be too surprised. He said, try to remove emotion from it as if you're playing a chess game. She did this, so this is what I'm going to do to respond to that. But it's done from a calm place, it's proactive, and it's not reactive. He said that he would try to remove himself emotionally by saying, all right, this is a movie, let's see what the characters are doing. And then I knew he was really getting this and owning this because I got an email one time, and it was something that the darkness had sent him that he forwarded to me, and he titled it "For Entertainment Purposes Only." I thought, okay, great, he's in that neutral place. Hey, look at this, this is pretty nutty. Another thing he would do is he would not open an email from the darkness before he went to bed. Otherwise, he couldn't sleep, so he'd wait till morning.
And that sounds simple, but he got to a point where he finally said, I may be curious, but I'm not going to let it ruin my evening. I'm not
Right.
going to let it keep me up all night.
Right.
Now, I can relate to that. That's one of those, I wonder what that is. But you know that he'd really gotten, what would you, conditioned,
Mhm.
desensitized to
Right.
some extent,
Mhm.
disciplined, but
Mhm.
he knew what he had to do.
And that's going back to the Medusa, her ex-husband, when he said, you have to get tough, you just do. And then once he started saying, yeah, I'll answer that tomorrow, I'll look at that tomorrow, as soon as you do it once, you can do it again and again and again. Let's see. All right, so the other thing this guy said is that he carried the visitation statutes in his wallet, in his briefcase. He had some in the glove box of his car because she was always pushing, saying, the judge said this, and so he would have these copies and had essentially memorized it. He said you have to know what to fight for and when to fight. In other words, pick your battles. So every time you get an email or text or phone call, don't jump, because you're just positively reinforcing the Pavlov dog story. Let's see. Okay, again, he talked about the kids getting more independent. One of the boys said, I'm going to the game with Dad, and the darkness said, no, it's not his night. And the boy said, I don't care, I'm going to the game. And then they had several kids. The first one, and this is interesting, the first one tried to please Mom, because Mom was the mean one, and she's the one who would hurt him. The next kid stayed under the radar, didn't cause any problems, but the day after graduation, boom, out of the house. And that was it. One of the
Unexpected.
Unexpected. It's like,
Yeah.
how could you? And she was just biding her time. This is important for parents because the kids oftentimes will have a strategy, even if it's totally unconscious, and it may look one way, but all of a sudden it goes another way.
We don't see much of that because when the kids are 18, they're out from under the court's jurisdiction, so you never hear about it.
Mhm.
The court never hears about it. It's a shame in some respects because the court would go, really? So all this time I thought that Mom or Dad was just misunderstood or was being unfairly blamed, but the children who never had a voice just up and left. And I beat the hell out of this other parent all this time and never believed it and blamed and all that kind of stuff. So it's interesting because that happens a lot. Or you'll see that things start to get better once the children are out from under the thumb
Right.
of the disturbed parent.
Right, right. And one of the kids then pushed back to the darkness and stood up to her and wouldn't have anything, wouldn't take her crud, and he's really paid the price. So to this day, even though this kid lives with his father now, the darkness is trying to get the boy locked up in a substance abuse facility, and it's to punish him. And so with these reptiles, They don't forgive, they certainly don't forget, and they're always going to be thinking about how they can get back at the person. All right, so another thing this man said is planting seeds. You've got to plant seeds, which is the same thing the other man said, and the seeds may show up down the road, and down the road it may be years. All right, this was a fun one. So the darkness drops the kids off at Dad's one day because Dad's taking the kids skiing. The kids are standing on the porch and they're cold, and the dad said, well, where are your coats? Well, Mom said we couldn't bring our coats over because if we take them skiing, they might get ripped.
They might.
They might get ripped, yeah. And then one time this guy, I said, are you going to dress up for Halloween this year? And he said, yeah, I'm going to get a torn parka and tell people I'm a skier. Right. And so what he did is, instead of saying, Mom, she's that, he just said, do you think Mom's really afraid that the coats will get torn? And they were like, no. And then he said, well, I'm not sure why she would say something like that. So again, letting the kids know, yeah, this is not true.
That's interesting,
yeah. Another thing this man would do is he would, when the kids would say, well, Mom said this, he would say, have you ever had another kid say something about you that wasn't true? I'd say, yeah. He'd say, well, how did you handle that situation? So again, trying to get to develop their critical thinking skills. And then the kids would give their response, and then they would ask Dad, well, how would you handle it? And he'd say, well, I'm trying to live your life so that people won't believe lies about you. So it's a nice way of, once again, setting a boundary and pointing the finger at the darkness without pointing the finger at the darkness, and using the kids.
Also letting the kids know, it's like Dad says that he encourages us to live a life where people won't tell lies, or or lies told about you won't be believed. Maybe what's being said about Dad is a lie, because he's living a life where I won't believe lies. Interesting.
Right. Planting seeds and then being patient, because...
But this is hard-won wisdom, too. I mean,
right.
I'm sure if you ask him, it's like, would you trade what you've learned if you could go back and do it again? He'd say, oh, I'd gladly. This wasn't worth it.
Yeah.
It wasn't worth it. I'm glad I can help,
right.
but it wasn't worth it.
Yeah, both of these guys they were brutalized. They really were. All right, this was an interesting one. So this guy's at work, and this woman kept calling him at work. This is during the divorce, and they'd say, so-and-so, you've got this call, and it was his attorney. All right, woman attorney. And then one day, someone at the office went up to this man and said, that woman keeps calling, and you drop everything, and you run and take the call. People think here at the office that you're maybe having an affair, or seeing someone, because the divorce hadn't gone through yet. And what this man said was, that's good to know. Thank you for letting me know that. And what I really like about that is he got to that neutral place where I don't care what people think of me. And that's a sense of freedom. And I think it's really important, again, to look for victories in other areas. And for him, in my view, that was a victory. He said, I don't care what they think of me. Let's see, another thing this guy did also, the divorce decree, pull out the divorce decree. Oh, also, he read it and reread it so many times that he armed himself. And that gave him strength and courage to say, no, this is what it says right here. And even then, though, one time he sent the divorce decree, highlighted the portion, and said, no, the judge said you have to pay that. And the darkness wrote back and said, well, that's not what he meant.
Yep. And then when you have to go back to court and you win that and you ask for the attorney's fees that you incurred, you're lucky to get 10 cents on the dollar. And so who won?
Right.
You lost.
You have to pick your battles. Let's see, choose what you'll respond to. A good question that this man asked himself is this absolutely necessary? One time I was in this man's office, and an email or a text came in from the darkness, and he was like, oh. And he said, oh, hang on just a second. And so he came up with this little thing, and what he would do is he would give himself a 24-hour rule. So he would write a response and put it in a Word document. it wasn't even a draft, because you might accidentally hit send, in a Word document.
Right.
And then he would wait until the next day and go back and reread it. And he said that, what was it, 1 out of, it was something like this.
I think it was 1 out of 5.
It was, no, 1/5 of a day.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, yes. He said that usually 8 out of 10 he wouldn't send. Once he calmed down, he said, I didn't need to send that. One of them, he would change it and take the emotion out of it and send it, and then maybe 1 out of 10 he would respond to.
Words to live by. And it's actually, I think, and you're the mental health professional, but all of that served a purpose. Number one, by doing this, he avoided shooting his mouth off unnecessarily.
Mhm.
Yet he also got the benefit of that cathartic effect of being able to express his feelings
Mhm.
without them being used against him. So he got a chance to detoxify.
Mhm.
Then he looked at it and said, now, I got my benefit out of it, but is this going to hurt me now? Is this going to
Mhm.
stir the pot? No, you know what? I can still respond. I can take the emotion out of it.
Mhm.
I can still document it. I can still defend myself
Mhm.
without giving the written finger, the written equivalent of the finger,
Right.
and then having somebody say, "Oh well, look, you know,
Right.
you're just as much to blame, and you're the one who's ratcheting things up."
Right.
It's like, I didn't do that.
Right.
Sometimes I realized no response was better than any response.
Right.
Sometimes I realized my response was good as it was.
Mhm.
Benjamin Disraeli said, never apologize for showing feeling, because when you do, you apologize for truth. And he knew that sometimes, like as is, warts and all, but then most of the time, take the emotion out, because that way you can't be hoisted on your own petard.
Right, right, yeah, perfect, absolutely perfect. Otherwise, all you're doing is handing them a club to whack you with, and
And undermining your own position and your own moral high ground. So this has been part of a 2-part series where we're dealing with people. Now these happen to both be men with reptile ex-wives. That just happens to be the best examples you have. It's not as though you were choosing these. It's like these were some good examples that would apply to both men and women, because we want to make it clear that this is something that you can have bad people on either side. So take the lessons from this and realize that it can apply to either
Absolutely,
gender.
absolutely.
And keep that in mind. Well, Gary, we appreciate that. And Gary doesn't pay me to come here, and I don't pay him to come here, because we both just want people to get a better handle on things and a better understanding, so that you know that there's no motive other than to get this information to you and to help you with some tools that aren't going to, where there's no ulterior motive. Still, some of you I know are going to say, this is somebody who acts like he's known me all my life. For those that would like to speak to you more, could you give them your contact information too?
Yeah, just shoot me an email. It's Klein, Klein, 999 @gmail.com.
Thanks very much.